Chapter 301 Humans. Volwyn POV. After spending nearly 6 months with the first-generation humans, he began to understand things a little better. Not much, but enough that he wasn't caught off guard by every little saying or gesture. When the human leader told him that the trip would take a matter of several months, Volwyn about shut down. Never in his many years had it taken more than 2 months to travel from one place to another while on the same planet. And that was already glacially slow. It was absurd. While that wasn't the only culture shock, nor even the first one, it was by far the largest. He'd expected a cozy few days, maybe a week or two, to sightsee the new planet while reaching his destination. Not the long slog it had turned into. The funniest part was that for the humans, this was their second time making the trip. Not only did they spend so much time doing it once, but they were doing it again. It was enough for him to start asking questions. Not right away, he spent those initial days feeling out his new company. It wouldn't do to start off on the wrong foot like the Nine Rivers Association. They had butted heads with the inhabitants immediately and had to swiftly backtrack to make amends. Sure, the vast cultural difference between the merchants and the first generation could be blamed, but everyone knew that going in. To instantly make a faux pas not even a day into arriving? That was just bad leadership. Instead of saying something he shouldn't or stepping on places he shouldn't, Volwyn watched and waited. He listened in and observed the interactions that they had with one another so he wouldn't accidentally make a mistake. He'd met many humans before, and there were even some with him, but every culture was different. The Ursonian humans were of help, but not much. They were just too different. Volwyn wasn't surprised. Even if they were both of the same race, there could still be a vast gulf between the different subraces. Take his own race and the High Elves, for example. They were about as far apart as subraces could get. Those snobby assholes who liked to look down on everyone. His caution turned out to be mostly unnecessary. They didn't take offense at anything he or his team did. Even when the Ursonians started asking more pointed questions, they were much more intrigued than Volwyn himself and couldn't hold themselves back. Being guards, they also didn't have the same diplomatic training. It was good that it turned out well, and it was immensely pleasing to watch his guards get along with the other humans. It would make everything so much easier if the relationship was friendly. After his period of observation, Volwyn couldn't help himself. He had to know how they tolerated this long travel. After coming to an agreement, his contact was with the city's appointed head merchant, so that was who he probed for information. A nice enough fellow if a bit on the quiet side. Not that such a thing was bad. A shame he wasn't one of ice. How do you live without portals? Volwyn asked the man as they sat by a campfire one night. Volwyn himself was a distance back to keep the heat at bay, but the others were warming up in its light. It's not hard to live without something you never had, the man remarked. But having our roads and cars destroyed was a blow. I admit that. Automobiles? Volwyn asked, tasting the foreign word. While he had strong translation skills, they weren't always perfect. Especially without context. They're like carriages but faster. Much faster. The human named Jonathan answered. How much faster? Volwyn asked. They were already slow. If it was just a little faster than now. Quite a bit. Jonathan said. On a highway, they averaged about 60 or 70 miles an hour, depending on the speed limit. The words miles an hour translated into his own units of measurement, and he frowned. That wasn't that much faster. Sure, it was a hell of a lot better than their current circumstances, but at that speed, it would still take forever. And how come we aren't using them? It would only take a few days to reach your city at that speed. Volwyn inquired. The human gave him an odd look. I wish we could. After this whole system thingy and magic, the engines don't work anymore. People are trying to fix them, but there hasn't been any luck. The human turned back to the fire and started poking at it. Plus, without roads, it might not be that much better. Volwyn tensed and had to keep himself from saying anything. They had gone through training on the subject, but it was so much different to hear it in person. The total disregard for the great system. The way they so nonchalantly insult it was eye-opening. From the many integrated worlds, there were accounts of how the first generation felt. especially after merchants started getting first rights. With them going in first, if the test was passed, they were usually the first contact that the first generation had. That being the case, there had been plenty of cases of such an attitude. The subject had caught his eye during his training because he had thought it to be outlandish. Sitting here now and hearing it, it didn't seem that way anymore. He, along with many races, revered the great system. Not every race did, but many looked up to it as a god. Even more godlike than actual gods in some areas. He'd never heard such disrespect towards it. The more zealous would say it was blasphemy. Volwyn tried to focus back on what was said, rather than how it was said. These engines don't work? How come? He asked, trying not to make a face. That's the million-dollar question, ain't it? The human laughed for some reason. But in all seriousness, we don't know. Some thought it was the electronics at first, but even without the CPU, they don't work. I'll have to show you a few the next time we pass by a city. The leading theory is that mana changed gasoline's properties. Even a slight alteration would muck up the entire thing. It requires precision to work. He sensed they were getting into things he wouldn't understand. He had no idea what this CPU was, but based on context, it seemed like something Jekkas would like. The ice gnome was the only person here who would be interested in technology like that. Volwyn's people didn't like such things, and Volwyn tended to agree with them. There was nothing magic couldn't accomplish. I admit that they sound faster, but that still isn't very fast. Did your people not use portals? Or faster means of travel? He asked again. Jonathan looked at him weird. There was no magic before. No mana. No levels. No nothing. We didn't have any portals. The fastest way to get from A to B was a plane, but those also don't work anymore. Not that I'd ride in one if they did. One bird and you're done. They're more like death tubes now. Volwyn's mind stopped working after the first sentence. No magic? No mana? What kind of world was this? Wait. What do you mean no magic? All of you here are E-rank, which is impossible for humans without it. Volwyn said. Each race, without essence, could only go so far. Humans could only reach F-rank without it. Everyone here was E-rank. We didn't start out that way, Jonathan said. All of us started at H-rank. H-rank? That was only ever discussed in textbooks and only happened during integrations. There were even experiments in mana vacuums meant to replicate it, but those never worked. Volwyn's first thought was impossible. Not only was that rank impossibly low, but that meant every human here had gone from H-rank to the peak of E-rank in just over 2 years. That was absurd. It usually took that long just to get through E-rank, not even mentioning how long it would take to reach E-rank to begin with. Sure, house heirs and elites could do it in a fraction of that, but they had resources handed to them. Humans do level faster than we do. That was another thing Volwyn forgot about. He was thinking in terms of his own race, and that was skewing his timeline. Elves and other long-lived races leveled slower than those with shorter lifespans. Their souls were less adapted to change and could only accrue essence at a set pace. Going over that limit was ill-advised. Straining the soul wasn't like straining the spirit or mind. It didn't grow back stronger, and it took forever to heal. Dragons took notoriously long to level, but their power more than made up for it. Even a hatchling before its first awakening could slaughter thousands at its own level. Volwyn had stopped the conversation there because his mind couldn't take any more. It was just so different. After his talk that had revealed so much, Volwyn kept things lighter. Every once in a while, he would delve back into it, but he had to give himself time to digest after such heavy conversation. Life without magic didn't make sense to him, and he was struggling to come to terms with that. It was a good thing there wasn't much else to do during the journey. The next week or so, he brought it back up and learned more about what their world used to be like. But it was hard to imagine. Over the months, he got more accustomed to their differences. Rangrick had joked he felt at home, and he wasn't far off. Volwyn felt like he was among dwarves rather than humans. They were immensely straightforward, brutally honest, and didn't beat around the bush. There was also the honor and duty aspect that they all carried, which made it feel that way. It didn't take Volwyn long to figure out why. Over the many days and weeks, His chance to speak with the human leader came around numerous times. While he mainly spoke with the head merchant and his wife, the city mayor, those two usually weren't far from the leader. The man himself spent most of his time in his wagon, but he came out at night and to eat. Even only having the rare conversation with the man, Volwyn could tell where such sentiment came from. Christopher was the reason people were like that. They all took after their leader in a way. Either because of respect or admiration, they embodied that same attitude and culture. It wasn't purely copied, but the hints were there. The first conversation Volwyn had with Christopher ended in a handshake deal. No contract signed or oath given. An agreement and a handshake. The funniest part was that they didn't even realize it themselves. They just thought it was normal. Well, it is how they've lived for a couple of years. Technically, it is normal for them. The months, while boring and dreadful, held their own charm. Delving into a people so different from his own was a good way to pass the time. After breaking away from the larger caravan and traveling with the smaller group, the trip went swiftly. With only a dozen or so, it wasn't as entertaining to watch. They passed through ruins and forests, rivers and plains. Their planet was a thing of beauty. Volwyn's home planet didn't have such diversity as the humans called it. Everything was either white or blue. His planet was all of the Arctic, with nothing else to gaze upon. Here was different. Lush trees and grass were nearly everywhere. They didn't pass by any mountains, but he knew they were out there. Volcanoes as well. Deserts weren't something Volwyn had ever witnessed, but the humans spoke of them. None of the planets he had been on had them. Not hot, sandy ones at least. By far the most intriguing out of everything was when it began to grow colder. Seasons. It was gradual, but every day the air turned cooler. The temperature one week was cooler than the last. What used to be stifling hot was just uncomfortably warm. Then it was a refreshing cool. He was told the seasons were a result of the planet's tilt, which none of the planets Volwyn had been on previously had ever experienced. His home world and Dervengard didn't have such a tilt. He'd heard of it before, but this was his first time experiencing it. They had just left a large city called the Twins when Volwyn smiled widely. His smile wasn't because he was told they were nearly there. He felt it in the air. Snow was finally here, something he hadn't seen in much too long. In his long life, he'd seen so much of it he grew numb to the experience, but being without it for so long made him smile wildly when he felt it coming. "What's got you so happy?" Jonathan asked. His cart was traveling side by side with his own as they rumbled on. Volwyn couldn't help but share the lovely news. "It's going to snow." The human looked up at the clouds, seeing the gray overcast. Curiously, he sniffed the air a few times. "Yeah, smells like it." "What?" Chapter 302 Blessed by the Sun. Chris POV. My fingers traced out the tiny runes upon the mana crystal in yet another attempt to create our very own message stone. So far, my attempts had all ended in failure, but it wasn't as frustrating as one might think. Even if every failed attempt was mightily upsetting, all I had to do was remember this wasn't life or death. A mistake didn't mean I would perish on the battlefield. It was simply that. A mistake. It wasted a bit of resources, but that was nothing we couldn't get back. I did my best to throw myself into the process, but no amount of supreme effort was going to let me learn the runes any faster. It wasn't even the learning part that I had trouble with. It was the engraving portion. I knew what the runes meant. I knew what they were supposed to do. It was getting the tiny, intricate runes carved into the crystal without messing them up that I had trouble with. My hands didn't shake. They just weren't precise enough. One slight twitch, one drifting wrist, and the string of runes would end up worthless. My strength didn't help. A mistake that wouldn't have meant anything to anyone weaker turned into either a crushed crystal or a failed piece so easily. Felt like if I breathed wrong, the runes would mess up. The studying part had been fun. I'll give it that, but the application part of the knowledge was not. As sad as that was, the stone itself was based on a radio, except instead of mundane radio waves being sent and received, it was magical transmissions. Some of the runes created the frequency, while others powered it and worked as amplifiers. One string was for sending while the other was for receiving. The runes imprinted on the mana, the information you wished to send, and a different string of runes worked to decode that into something understandable once it was received. It was quite ingenious, and I could already see how it could be improved. Encrypting and encoding and all that. I'll try again tomorrow. We were running out of the small crystal fragments I was using, and I couldn't carve into them with abandon. I stepped out of my tent into the night's fresh air. We were nearing the twins, and Marcus was visibly pleased. He and his people were all excited to get home. Summer had waned, and it was now time for fall. Soon, very soon, the first snows would fall and winter would arrive. Every day that grew colder than the last was a step in the right direction. I wonder if they've harvested the crop yet? My thoughts, as usual, turned to home. Sam was in charge of Frostheim in our absence. I knew she would do a good job, but I couldn't help but worry. Living with Abigail had that effect on people. They were further north where the first frost would come sooner. We had to plant later and harvest early compared to down here. Farmers had to take a skill to speed up growth, as without it, the crop wouldn't ripen in time. On Abigail's long list of things to do, finding cold-friendly crops was near the top. We had winter wheat, but that was about it in terms of what we could grow during the other months. She had already started discussing with the merchants which new seeds to buy that would thrive during the cold months. I wouldn't be surprised if entire new fields had been created and planted with what she found by the time we arrived home. I looked up at the twinkling stars, a scene that had once brought tranquility, and sighed in frustration. I wasn't frustrated with my work or how slow the journey was taking. No matter how long I lay on the bed or spent time immersed in books, the feeling wouldn't go away. I felt that the fresh air and being in nature would help, but it didn't seem to accomplish much. I was just as frustrated as before. It would occasionally go away, leaving me in peace for a day or two, but it would always come back. I would hear something or remember something, and all the tense feelings of anger would return, especially when I had to check on the ice coffins. Calm down, Christopher. Even the stars didn't bring much joy anymore. Chris! Austin happily shouted out as he saw me. Get your big lug over here. Today's the day. What? I mumbled, half confused. Today's the day. He waved his newly healed arm in the air with a smile that could split the sun. His joy and excitement were clear for everyone to see if they were still up. Ah, his evolution. I sometimes forgot that he was already capped in both class and profession. He also had all of the steps he wished to complete finished. It was easy to assume that everyone was still a bit away, like I was. I can't wait. You think I'll get an epic? What about a legendary? He buzzed, and then added, I haven't done all that much though. This rank increase was different than the rest. The demotion took place which would decrease the rarity of most of his skills. It was usually all, but there was a possibility of having a really powerful skill at the peak of a rarity and have it remain at that rarity, but at the bottom of the new level. It was rare, but possible. Questions were brought up about how it worked for class rarity. We could only go up 2 ranks per evolution, and if we were demoted, did that mean we could only go up 1? Say you go into the evolution with a rare class, but after the demotion, it would be an uncommon class. Did that mean you could only possibly get an epic class? It turned out that our worries were unfounded. The demotion only took place after the evolution. If you went into it with a rare class, you could still pick a legendary class, but it was apparently much harder to receive. How and when a specific rarity class or profession was offered still didn't make sense to me. If it was based purely on steps taken, then there would have been a book about it. The fact that it took into consideration feats of strength and deeds accomplished made everything impossible to say anything definitively. It had to take into consideration how well you forged your core, right? If your anchor was forced or natural. If you stayed conscious during body refining and came out with a better result, how well you fought. The results of your battles. What was taken into consideration was never specified, but it was believed that everything was. How that worked and who kept track was a mystery. It was already mentioned that the system doesn't watch our every move. That would be impossible on the scale of the universe. Maybe it's recorded in our spirit or our soul, like a running record of who we are and what we've done. It all boiled down to more is better. More achievements, better achievements, more feats, better feats, more steps, ad infinitum. Are you doing it now? I asked and couldn't help but notice the near pitch-black darkness of the night. When I started my stroll, I hadn't anticipated running into him, ready to evolve. Austin gasped, "Of course. Are you suggesting I wait? Would waiting until morning kill you?" I said, mainly in jest but with a hint of truth. Yes, it would. He nodded in complete seriousness. My body will spontaneously explode if I don't evolve in the next 10 minutes. Aha. And this is a fact? Do you mind if we test it? I could trap him in ice for at least that long. It is a fact. I'm gathering the posse as we speak. Rouse Gabriel and your mother if they wish to watch. Before I could blink, he was gone. Off to find the rest of our family if I had to guess. Both my mother and Gabriel were sleeping, but they were willing to take part. All we would be doing was standing around, but it was fun to watch. To be there for the moment Austin had prepared. During the time I was fussing with the message stone, he had cleared a small area not far from where we made camp, and Ashley was already standing in wait as we arrived. Gabriel, my mother, and I were the first to arrive, and then came Austin's mother, Carrie, and hell, even Mitchell came. I hadn't seen much of him lately. Ashley, are you sure he's healed? Carrie asked worriedly. She was the most anxious out of all of us. Being that it was her son, it was understandable. Oh, come on, Mom, everything's fine. Austin drawled. I'm fit as a fiddle. Carrie looked at Ashley to confirm. Yes, he's fine. I even had him do physical therapy for the past few days to make sure. Everything looks fine. See, even our great healer says I'm good. Austin was getting impatient. He never had much of it to begin with. All right then, Carrie said and took out the box she had been tightly holding. To make sure Austin didn't jump the gun, his mom held onto the parts he bought. He saw this as an insult, but went along with it all the same. He could have stopped it if he wanted to, but didn't. Perfect? Austin's eyes lit up seeing the box, and he looked at Ashley. Make with the magic. The healer sighed and activated her skills. A heavily powered cleanse swept through the cleared area to make sure nothing unwanted remained. It was a precaution to make sure nothing interfered with the assimilation process. After her skill swept through, Austin ran over to the box, opened it in a flash, and removed what was inside at what looked like his top speed. 1 second he was standing still, the next he was seated in the cleansed area with a feathery corpse. Well, a specific part of a corpse. Having the radiant eagle bloodline, he chose the wings for his previous evolution. There was the option to go the same route as me and choose bones, but he didn't want to do that. Hollow and light bones didn't seem like an improvement. Instead, he went with the keel. Along with the wings, he was hoping that they would allow him to fly. Knowing what we did, self-powered flight in Drank was incredibly rare for humans. That just wasn't something we could do. Those with avian bloodlines or a sky-related affinity of some kind usually only started true flight in C rank. The rest, those who didn't have those advantages, could fly in B rank, but through a different method. That crushed Austin's hopes, but he was still holding out for the possibility of gliding. In his words, if Chris can yeet me high enough, I'll be able to glide at least. The keel itself was nearly as large as Austin was. He said it was from a D-rank Radiant Eagle with substantial agility. I wasn't as well versed in his options, and I knew he wouldn't make a bad choice. The how behind incorporating the keel and meshing it with a human's physiology didn't make sense to me, but luckily, that was mainly taken care of by the system. If one didn't meet the requirements and had to evolve manually, they would have to take care of everything themselves. A task I did not envy. Having the system do it for us was a lot easier and didn't lead to stupid mistakes. The only thing that could go wrong was if he picked something his body couldn't handle, but Austin knew his limits. He'd push them, sure, but wouldn't go too far. Here goes nothing. Austin smiled cheekily and initiated the evolution. Just like with the merchant's evolutions, a great rush of mana started gathering around him and changes started to happen. The keel started to break down and dissolve into small particles that were absorbed into his body. The gathered mana followed after the particles and he started absorbing more and more. Felt like he was igniting a mana heart, but I knew he wasn't. He'd already done so, rather forged his core. His cultivation technique wasn't as difficult as mine, and he was able to forge his core much faster than I was. The bastard bragged about it all the time. It was one of the last things he did before we left to take advantage of the growing sunlight. The sun wasn't available in the north evenly. The pressure grew as we stood and watched, but not much changed after the keel completely dissolved. His body didn't suddenly turn feathered or grow in odd proportions. My aura couldn't feel anything taking place through all the interference. There was just too much of it to pick anything out. He was going for the temporary option again, which wasn't a surprise. That had been his plan all along. We all watched in silence as the process transpired, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that Austin came back to awareness. Seated now with nothing surrounding him, his eyes shot open and he smiled even wider. "Fuck me. That's a rush." His first words, while vulgar, had most of us sighing in relief. We didn't think anything would go wrong, but that was still a possibility. His eyes were alight as he tested out his new power, shooting around the clearing like a pinball, testing his new top speed if I had to guess. He finally came to a rest back where he once sat and was glowing faintly. Ha 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 ha. If everyone wasn't already up, they certainly were now. His booming laugh rang out through the forest. Carrie couldn't hold it in anymore. "Well, what did you get?" I knew Austin was savoring the moment, and I didn't want to be the first to ask. "Epic, baby." He laughed again. "In both of them, both class and profession. That means he just gained 28 stat points in every stat. 252 points in just a few seconds. And they sound cool as fuck too," he said excitedly. "All yous have the honor of gazing upon a herald of dawn and explorer under the sun's light. Don't all bow down at once." He honest-to-God cackled. Well, it's good to see him so excited. "What skill did it give?" Gabriel asked. "Leave it to him to inquire about skills right away. It's called Blessed by the Sun." It replaced Sunshine with an epic version of it, but even better. Instead of just a stat boost that rises and falls with the sun, it's a constant power-up while the sun shines down on me, no matter if it's the first rays of dawn or the last light of dusk. And, even better, it's more than just a stat increase. It's everything. Stat, bloodline, skills, everything. He rambled on about his new skill quickly before looking up at the sky. "Shame the sun isn't up," he muttered. I couldn't help myself. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. Someone tried to get you to wait until morning. Chapter 303, Anticipated Arrival. Viserimet's POV. It took nearly 3 years, but his debt was finally paid, no small part because he finally got fed up. Diving into the blight and slaughtering half a sector had a way of speeding things up. High King Dane didn't approve, but he also couldn't tell Viserimet's what to do. Dane wanted to draw things out a little longer and use the front lines to battle-harden his troops, but Viseria wasn't going to sit around and wait a decade for that to happen. The dwarves were hardy enough already. He was missing all the fun. The new integration would nearly be over by the time he finished his tour, and that was unacceptable. There had already been news of a few planets being tested already. By and large, most of the inhabited planets for this integration weren't very interesting, but there were a few that he earmarked to watch as they evolved. Having a demon in the integration usually added a bit of spice to things. The infernal bastards always shook things up. Desmodius will be pleased. Not every integration had every race represented, and demons always grew excited when new ones arose. It was a chance to shake up their hierarchy, an opportunity all demonkind found fun. Viseria never understood why they gained such joy in chaos. During this time usually, he would be out flitting between the various pantheons making fun or poking his head in to see what they were up to, pick up on who they were watching and take note of any they blessed. Dirank was still a little early to start blessing people, but there were factions out there that started that early. Ba the Lightbringer and his ilk, they were not the most fun people to be around, but Viseria would visit anyway, if only to see which worlds they were going to contest. The Father of Light, as the bastard titled himself, always went about things the same way. It got old after a while, and it wasn't much fun to watch. Now, if the demons, the faction of light, and the Holy Pantheon all got into it on the same world, now that would be something to watch. A small part of him wished to go look in on the human with Emer's technique, but he held himself off. He didn't want to get his hopes up. I wonder if Scotty took my advice? Volwyn POV. He had to admit that there were aspects of this new planet that he'd grown to love compared to the others he'd been on. There were also a few that he wished would change, but that only came with time. The certain lawlessness that came from not having firmly defined powers and factions would be bad for business. Also, the travel situation could use some updating. But, while that would change as factions and cities grew, there were a few things he hoped would stay the same. The beauty this world held, while vastly different from what he was used to, still held a certain charm. It would be a shame to see that destroyed. He knew a few factions that would do so. They built everything in the name of efficiency and destroyed whatever landmark was in their way to make it so. The Forgeborn weren't the best eye when it came to aesthetics. Nor was the White Horde. While they passed through a few small towns on their way north, the Twins was a wonder to behold. Its walls stood tall and sat right next to the most running water Volwyn had ever seen in his life. Obviously, he'd seen rivers before, but nothing like that. There was the occasional glacier or snow melt that combined into such a waterway, but that was something different. The settlement itself was rustic. He knew that they hadn't had that long to rebuild, but it was a far cry from Dervengard, that was for sure. Plus, it was a little too warm for his tastes. The humans said that it grew much colder in the winter and that the city would see plenty of snowfall, but it just wasn't the same. Not truly. After spending less than a day there, his retinue was off at record speed. They wished to return with all haste, and Volwyn wasn't complaining. His carriage could go much faster than theirs, but it had to hold itself back. It wasn't until another month had passed that they came near where he was to set down roots. His companions had spoken a lot about their home. They would travel around towns and small cities with barely contained disappointment at what they saw. If they held those settlements in contempt, Frostheim had to be better, right? He wasn't holding out for the advanced enchantments and luxury of the Emporium, but he hoped that they at least weren't barbarians. It would be a rough few years if they lived in tents. As temperatures plummeted, he and his team grew more relaxed. They could deal with the heat, but it wasn't that fun to live in it. Spending months in it was already enough dissatisfaction. Snow, slow at first but growing more intense, built upon the land, and it began to look more and more like home. Snow drifts rose and fell in the open plains, and the trees lost their leaves. That was another oddity this planet held, but it made sense if there were seasons. That wouldn't work in a world of permanent winter, but it worked here. The color change was one such beauty he wouldn't mind experiencing again. The snow's attempts to slow their travel failed, and they marched on at the same speed. The trees whistled by as they drew ever further north. Volwyn knew they were getting close. From the maps they had, it wouldn't be too long now. It was also clear from the faces of his companions that they were drawing near. They had ridden hard and most were tired, but they were pushing through all the same. It wasn't until one morning they set off at a slower pace that there was something different. There was nothing to cause the delay, so he grew interested. Snow fell slowly from the sky, but not in any great blizzard that would hinder them. The clouds blocked out the harsh rays, but it was still light enough to travel. The snow they plowed through was a few feet thick, but that hadn't stopped them before. It was the subtle gazes and looks from the humans that finally tipped him off. They were getting close and they wished to see his reaction. So be it then. I wish to see this city they're so proud of. The trees gave way finally, and he was able to set eyes on where he would be staying for the foreseeable future. They hadn't expected him to be able to see it from so far away, so he was free to gaze without worry. The eyesight of elves was nothing to sneeze at. Jekka's, Rangrick, and his guard still couldn't see it, but he could. Tall walls rose from the ground that put many of the previous fortifications they came across to shame. The only one that came close was the wall around the twins. It stood over 40 feet tall, with towers spaced out along its length standing even above that. Volwyn could even pick out a second wall even taller than the first further into the city with a castle at its center. It wasn't until they grew closer and his team started to make it out that Volwyn could feel the enchantments laid upon the stone. Impressive wards for such a fledgling city. The walls being made of stone instead of ice was something he hadn't expected. Most walls he'd seen were made of ice, but that also had something to do with the planet they were on. He had to admit, compared to the rest of what he'd seen, the city was head and tails above everything else. A few others had basic enchantments, but those were paltry compared to the ward he felt now. If it became activated, it would hold out quite well against attack. He allowed a small smile to form so that his company didn't assume he disliked the city. Far from it, in fact. It was perfect. It would hold against the settlement waves, and it would keep any stray monster at bay. Volwyn doubted any human army could take it, not unless they had weapons hidden away he didn't see. From what he saw in the aftermath of the test, enemies would be hard-pressed to siege the walls. It wasn't only because of the ward either. Someone had poured spirit energy into every block upon the wall, saturating the stone in its energy. Volwyn suspected who was responsible, but he wouldn't know until he saw the man again and compared the energy signature. The application was, well, it left a lot to be desired, but the fact that so much of it had been expended was mind-blowing. Volwyn didn't have an anchor himself, but he knew enough about them to know how difficult a task that was. That much energy took time to accumulate. Not days or weeks, but months. Maybe even longer than that, and it had been poured into the stone relentlessly. The walls would stand up through attacks, if nothing else than because of the sheer amount of spirit energy in them. The attackers would have to expend it all before they could truly start damaging the stone. Jonathan had watched him as they approached, and Volwyn had kept quiet so far, but not anymore. Impressive. The amount of spirit energy is outstanding. The man smiled proudly. You notice that, eh? Most can't pick it up without an anchor themselves. All they feel is a sense of hopelessness in attacking. They do not comprehend the reason behind it, but they instinctively know that attacking will be near impossible, Volwyn explained. Spirit energy wasn't like mana. Nearly everyone could feel mana to some extent. Only those who had formed an anchor themselves or knew what they were looking at would be able to tell it was there. The gates opened wide, and there was a large reception awaiting them, cutting off their conversation. Volwyn didn't wish to impose, so he kept back and out of their way. It wasn't until later that Jonathan came back to guide them. Sorry about that. We only sent a few letters, and they wanted to hear the full story. They spent all this time in the dark and were eager to finally be informed. That's understandable, Volwyn nodded. Here, follow me. Abigail already set aside some land for you guys in the market district. Jonathan played the guide and pointed out the places they passed by or where things they might need were. Restaurants, taverns, and inns. They would have to stay in one for the time being until the Emporium could be built. We passed through the south gate, but there are two more. The east gate and west gate don't get as much throughput, but there's still a bit of foot traffic through them. The west gate more so because of the dungeons. The street lining the wall is dedicated to garrison buildings, barracks, order buildings, and stables. He pointed at what they had already passed by. If you need a horse, it's over there. We used to restrict them, but after 2 years of breeding, we have enough to rent them out or let people buy them. Wolves are another matter. If you want enough to pull a sled, you'll have to contract the beast tamers yourself. Oh dear, how many animals live in this city? He also wasn't sure what the difference between the garrison members and order members was, but he didn't want to interrupt. Right here in the south is the crafters district. Forges, leatherwork, tailor shops, and the rest are here. In the southwest is the market district, where your shop will be. Inns, taverns, and all kinds of shops are over there. The residential district lines the cliff. Both east and west of the castle are dedicated to houses and apartments. Most of the shops and crafting buildings have upstairs housing, but this is for everyone else. Frostheim grew pretty fast, and we're still trying to catch up on everything construction-wise, but most land inside the wall has been developed already. Plans to expand are already being discussed, but we don't know the specifics yet. Volwyn followed along and nodded accordingly. It was a common enough setup that it wasn't that hard to understand. He did notice that they were running out of space rather quickly, but it seemed like they had plans for that. There was only one question that Volwyn had that wasn't answered during the tour. What's in there? He pointed at the second, taller wall he saw. He'd noticed the cliff already, and the half-circle layout of the city in his head was already being filled out. The only thing left blank was what was behind the inner wall. The first wall was one giant arc going nearly 180 degrees from cliff face to cliff face. The inner wall was a much shorter arc that went barely 45. It looked like a peninsula jutted out from the generally straight cliff, and they built the castle directly upon it. "That's the castle and inner courtyard," Jonathan answered. "It's where our family lives with a few other specialized buildings in it, but it's mainly the castle. Abigail and Christopher both live there, if you need to see them for whatever reason. I do as well. Like a palace district?" As they talked, they were directed west toward where they were to set up shop. The places they passed by were nice enough, and the wares he could pick out were of good quality. They weren't masterworks or anything, but impressive enough for it to be the norm. There were a few weapons that caught his eye that stood out as well. "There's a half-decent smith here." They finally came upon an empty piece of land that had nothing built on it. There were buildings on either side, but the space was large enough not to be cramped. "Here's your plot." It was supposed to be something else, but the buyer disappeared. "We think he died, but we don't have proof." The agreement stated he had to start construction within 3 months, and he obviously hasn't done that, so now it's yours. There are a few rules we ask people to follow. It's not mandatory per se, but we'd appreciate it if you followed them. Here it is. The long list of regulations and licenses they'd need. Don't paint it any weird colors. No neon green or hot pink. No weird architecture. There's a bit more leeway with this one, but once again, try not to make an eyesore. The plot extends 4 stories in the air and allows for a basement. Straight up and straight down. We already had a few trying to expand underground past their boundaries. The human stopped and thought for a second. "I feel like I'm forgetting some, but as long as you don't have blinking lights or gaudy colors, I'll be happy. If you need a construction team, I can recommend a few, but other than that, you're all set." "That's it? Just don't make it look bad?" Volwyn was caught off guard, and he expected a much longer explanation containing wildly different information. What is the lease situation and the tax rate? He was prepared to look over a few documents and sign things, but this was turning out much different. Jonathan looked confused. "Didn't Chris go over this with you already?" Volwyn shook his head more vigorously than intended. "No, he just asked what we wanted in return for setting up in his city." Yeah, I know that part." Jonathan nodded. "You asked for a plot of land in the market district." He pointed at the plot they were standing in front of. "And for protection from the waves. And a pylon terminal," Volwyn added. "Oh yeah, that too. But I can't do anything with that until the building's constructed. My skill needs a viable target, and an empty plot of land isn't one," he said. "Am I missing something here?" Volwyn thought. He signed no contract, spoke no oath. It was odd. "Do you have a copy of the tax laws I can read?" His contract through the Emporium stipulated he had to follow all local tax laws, and he still hadn't read up on what they were yet. We don't have any tax laws specifically. We just have the set tax rate through the pylon." The man said, "We have punishments if you don't pay them, but I don't think those are what you were asking about. You only have the set rate through the pylon and that's it? No specific tax on certain goods? No tariffs on imports? No off-planet tax or increased tax rate from certain factions?" Volwyn couldn't help but ask. No. Just the flat 10%. That's not saying that won't change in the future, but for now, just the flat rate," he said before adding, "Dungeons are different, though. Anything you pull out of those gets taxed at 20%. Oh heavens. No paperwork. No contracts. No minutiae they had to wade through. This was already looking better and better. "Chris will be back in a month or 2, so if you need anything, come to either Abigail or me until he returns. Even after he gets back, you'll probably still deal with us. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We want this thing up and running as quickly as possible." "I understand," Volwyn said. "We'll get started right away. It will take a few days, but we'll be ready in a week at most." "A week?" Jonathan was surprised. "Damn, you guys work fast." Little does he know. The guards were chosen specifically for this reason. Their professions made them perfect for the job. Every one of the 5 had just the professions they needed. Chapter 304, Communication Formation. Chris POV. Marcus and I walked around the recently cleared area and checked it over one more time. When I had asked the man where he wanted me to build the communication formation, I hadn't expected him to choose here. I wasn't really expecting anything, but inside one of the rooms of his manor, wasn't it? Outside somewhere or hidden away, maybe, but not just inside one of the rooms. Well, it's his choice. It isn't that weird. This will take a while. A few days at least. I said so he didn't feel the urge to stay and watch. Having an audience would just be weird. That's fine. I need to catch up on things anyway. You're welcome to call on Gregory for anything you need. Marcus waved at the nicely dressed butler and made a swift exit after saying so. He had a lot to do, and I didn't blame him for leaving. Abigail would work through most of the backlog that accumulated while we were gone, but there would still be a stack of it waiting for my return. We had been gone for 5 months after all. The cold felt good, but it wasn't the same as home. Sure, it was frigid here in November, but not the devastating frigid of home. The snow was a joy to see again, but even that was hard to get excited about. After Marcus and the butler left, Gabriel was the only one remaining in the room. He was intrigued by the formation and wanted to watch me put it down. Not going out with Austin again? I poked at him, remembering the state he was in when we first left the city on boats. He and Austin had been in rough shape. No, thank you. He's probably out there going even harder after his evolution. Gabriel said. That was probably an understatement. There were honest-to-God brewers in the city and they had actual ale. Austin was most likely off somewhere seeing how many tankards it took for him to feel anything. With company, of course. It would be remiss of him if he did so alone. All right, I clapped. Hand me that bag over there. Inside the bag were all the tools I would need. I hadn't anticipated needing my engraving tools during the trip, so I had to borrow a few from the enchanters here. With Marcus giving them a stern look while I asked to borrow them, they were more than happy to lend a hand. The rest of the bag was filled with the materials I would need. Mana-conductive metals that would function as the inlay for the formation. Technically, I could just carve it into the wooden floor, but after a few uses, the tremendous amount of mana would burn through it and cause the formation to fail. Even the metal wouldn't hold up forever, but it would last a lot longer than the wood and could be replaced much easier. Engraving a formation didn't always require tools, but in order to get the metal into the right shape and to fill out the grooves smoothly and entirely, it needed to be melted down like solder. Even with my many gifts, being able to melt things down was not one of them, which required tools. Having an assistant who could do so was another option, but a modified soldering gun worked just the same. Studying the formation that Fitzwallace gave me was eye-opening. Being able to look at the formation and the message stone at the same time was an unexpected boon. The way that they were so different, but accomplished the same goal, was remarkable. Having the notes involved for how his enchanters came up with the formation made puzzling out how it worked that much easier. I could have done it without the notes, and with just the final product, but it would have taken me a lot longer and an insane amount of effort. Beginner runic language worked based on the knowledge I already had and drew connections from that. The skill would help me understand runes similar to ones I already understood. So in the case of the communication formation, it wasn't very helpful because I had no background in any of the runes used. The notes described some of them, but others were left mysteriously unmentioned. State secrets or something. It didn't matter in the long run because the other books we purchased filled in the gaps. After reading up and getting a base understanding, beginner runic language worked a lot better. I started by drawing the formation in chalk. It would help lay out what I wanted to do without damaging the floor permanently. What's this rune do? Gabriel asked. He knew some runes, but he didn't have the skill to help understand them. His understanding came from brute memorization and asking me all the time. This is the connection rune. It was the first one I drew. It establishes a link between the formation I'm putting down and the one I will put down in Frostheim. What's all the stuff around it? Well, connection can mean a lot of things. Physically adjoined, two things related to one another and whatnot. These extra knots help regulate which meaning of the rune I want. They change mana in a way that it knows what meaning I'm going for. So they're like context clues? That wasn't how I pictured it, but the description works. I thought of them more like design parameters or fixed inputs. I said, I thought of formations like computer codes while he thought of them like written-out text. The way they were interpreted varied to everyone. The additional knots, connections, and pathways are where all the inefficiencies of a formation are usually found. Well, the theoretical inefficiencies at least. There's always mucking up the physical engraving and material defects that can cause problems. I said. Gabriel looked at the growing jumble of lines and intersections with a skeptical eye. This doesn't look very efficient. Normally, I would say looks can be deceiving, but in this case, you're absolutely right. I chuckled. They had to be uber-specific in order to get the right connection that a bunch of added knots for regulation had to be added. Half of these wouldn't be needed if you only needed to connect to one formation. The additions are for being able to choose which other paired formation to connect to. The first time I laid out the formation on the road and took a look using formation's mana flows, I nearly cried. It wasted so much mana that it was unbelievable. If you had to power the thing manually, it would take nearly a dozen people for it to work. I did my best to tweak it, but there wasn't much I could do without rebuilding the formation from the ground up, which wasn't that high a priority. That was pushed off to a later problem and would take a lot more study of these kinds of runes. It wasn't like I was used to shoving them on gear for a few years by now like I was with other runes. This part is all for finding and securing the connection between two formations. Imagine it like a phone call almost, except it doesn't get routed through cell towers and satellites. I described as I continued putting down the formation. This part is for turning sound into something that can traverse that connection. Now, wait, what? Gabe interrupted. Phones use a microphone to catch sound and turn it into electrical signals. This does the same thing except it's magical instead of electrical. I said, it imprints on the mana the information you want to say. I pointed toward the sound rune and the knots around it that worked to capture the sound waves. It was above my understanding how they did that. My understanding is that it sends that imprinted mana through the connection and unwraps it and plays it on the other side. I described while pointing toward the part of the formation that would unwrap the mana. That was where it was a little fuzzy. I tried to think of it in terms of a computer sending and receiving data, but that didn't really work. The metaphor broke apart because magic and mana could do a lot of things computers couldn't. Like a voice recorder? He asked. Essentially. Can this be intercepted? Like the message stone can? Gabe questioned. It was good that he was thinking that way. He had poked his head in and tried to wrestle the message stone away from me, but I shot him down. We did look at it together a few times, but he didn't have the same understanding of runes as I did. If the stone had been enchanted magically instead of runically, I would have been in the same boat he was. Spells were far from being my strong suit. It was during those times that I described what the stone did, like I was doing now for the formation. Even though it was rune-based, he still liked this kind of thing, and I saw no harm in indulging him. The message stone sent out a blast of mana in all directions like a radio would. It took a specific rune on the other end that could receive that blast, but that could easily be captured by others and decrypted. Like key fobs. The specific frequency used in key fobs to unlock a car could be captured and figured out quite easily if they were in range when they were used. Not in the same way, but yes, I said. This forges a connection that could be tapped into, but I doubt anyone will have the ability to do so anytime soon. The hardest part would be finding the connection in the first place, which isn't exactly visible. Plus, any disturbance in the connection would cause problems. More mana would be needed to stabilize it, and that would be a telltale sign someone was listening in. The entire process took a little longer with Gabriel asking questions throughout the work, but that wasn't a huge deal. A day extra wasn't going to kill anyone. Not when we had actual beds to sleep in and we weren't out in the woods. People partied and drank like fish the first night, but I wasn't that into it. I was more focused on making sure the formation got done. I would indulge when we finally made it home. Austin tried to get me to go out, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Gabriel joined him one night, but after struggling to stand up straight the next morning, he didn't join him again. Engraving the formation took nearly a complete day of continuous work and was the most grueling task. Luckily, I made it through without any critical mistakes or any that I couldn't fix. The formation flashed in completion, and Gabriel gave a round of applause. "You get anything?" he asked. I had heard the chime and knew I had a level. "What does that make you now, 11 away?" "Yeah, 11 away," I said with a nod. Austin wasn't the only one to evolve during our journey. A few members of the Order did so as well, along with some of Marcus's people. No one else in our family was ready, but some were drawing close. Gabriel himself was nearing the day as he was already capped in both class and profession, but wanted to try a few more things before pulling the trigger. All in all, we stayed in the Twins for 4 days before breaking off and making our way home. Without Marcus and his army with us, we were down to only a few hundred instead of the nearly 1,000 we had before. Marcus sent us off with some fresh supplies, and the group were more than eager to get back home. We made great time even though the snow and weather tried to hinder us. All of us were accustomed to the winters here, and we had prepared accordingly. Having a plethora of ice and snow affinities to clear the way also helped. Our first time up here, it was only me and a paltry few others who had the skills to do so. Chapter 305 Full Status. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, E, Human *. Class, E, Hammer of the Jotner, Legendary. Level 100 Evolution available. Profession, E, Runesmith. Rare, Level 89. Affinity, Arctic. Faction, Frostheim, Leader. Title Baron. Strength, 1827. Agility, 887. Perception, 539. Fortitude, 1,349. Endurance, 1,064. Vitality, 669. Intelligence, 455. Wisdom, 777. Acumen, 436. Free points, 55. Laws, Lesser Law of Ice, Lesser Law of Wind. Body stage, Body of Stone, Northern Wind Body. Mana Heart, Perfect Ignition, Stars of Primordial Frost. Spirit stage, Anchor Formation. Class skills, Boiler. Profession skills, Boiler. Coins, 0. My status screen had a rather large number of changes happen to it during this trip. 5 skill upgrades alone would have been a large enough difference, but there were even more than that. For new skills, 3 purchased and 1 chosen. 2 skills were replaced this way, Identify and Identify Blocker, but I was more than willing to see those go for their replacements, Aura Detection, and Identify Freeze. The changes weren't soon to end either. The merchants hadn't been able to start anything until they had their shops set up, but once we returned to Frostheim, it would start another round of buying some upgrades. They wouldn't be as large and not nearly as impactful either, but it would still be a needed boost. Since rare and epic skills were rare to be able to buy with money, it was only the more common skills I sought to buy this way. Skills like Wind Manipulation, Dash, Charge, Taunt, Wind Blade, Wind Bolt, and a smattering of striking skills. I already had Power Strike and Penetrating Strike, but others would come in handy as well, especially if I were to upgrade them as far as I had with the others. Sundering Strike, Crippling Strike, Extended Strike, Multi-Strike, and even Piercing Strike. The last one, Piercing Strike, didn't sound very useful with my weapon of choice being a hammer, but I could see it coming in handy on certain occasions with others. A large ice spear specifically. As they were, the common skills wouldn't add much to what I could do, but it was better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them. Same with the other somewhat generic skills. Technically, there was a cap on how many skills I could have, but I could always drop them later if I needed something else. They were skills that everyone had access to and usually picked up early on, but it wasn't too late for me to go back and pick them up. I could have made my job a little easier if I hadn't wasted a choice on throwing weapon proficiency, but hindsight, it is what it is. The main reason I pulled up my status and was delving into it while we were marching on was because of my free points. I had 55 of them now, and that would only grow as my profession leveled. I only gained 5 free points a level from Runesmith, which meant I would end up with 110 of them to spend before I was capped. 110 left that I had to choose where they would go. Planning ahead, I wrote out what my stats would look like when I did finally hit level 100. Strength, 1876. Agility, 975. Perception, 594. Fortitude, 1,366. Endurance, 1,097. Vitality, 669. Intelligence, 543. Wisdom, 887. Acumen, 502. Free points, 110. My agility was my main worry. It was floating under that 2-to-1 ratio that I like to keep between it and strength. I noticed my less fluid movements already, but I had held off on putting free points into the stat yet. I first thought it was because I was still recovering, but I was fully healed by now, and the jerkiness persisted. I knew Runesmith would even it out eventually, which was why I didn't want to jump the gun. That being said, the urge to throw them all into vitality was there. It was lagging pretty far behind the rest of my physical stats, but I held off on doing that, too. The bed would help along with cold meditation, but I mainly did it because of my fortitude and frozen patchwork. My defense, body, and ability to persist after injury made any potentially fatal wound take a long time to eventually kill me. Enough time to either get to a healer or to the bed. It wasn't foolproof, and I would have liked to have endless stat points in order to bring vitality up in line with fortitude or endurance, but I couldn't. The rest of the ratios that I liked to keep were fine other than strength, agility. Agility to perception was above 2:1, and wisdom to acumen was above that as well. My mana heart helped replenish my mana much faster than my acumen stat would imply. The heart piggybacked off my strong body and physical stats to regenerate mana much faster. It was one of the main things I liked about the technique, no matter how hard it was to accomplish. It also made my mana pool larger than my wisdom would allow as well. Intelligence, on the other hand, was left way behind. My heart compressed the mana in my veins and worked to increase its concentration, but I wouldn't be competing with mages near my level in magic. If I threw all 110 points into wisdom, I would be only a few points away from 1,000. I could also do the same for strength and be a few shy of 2,000, but that wasn't of the same importance. With 997 points in wisdom, I could think about taking the next step for my mana cultivation. Honestly, I probably didn't even need to put any into wisdom to start considering it. The Stars of Primordial Frost was different. It was unlike any other mana cultivation technique I had read, and by this point I'd read a decent amount. It differed wildly from techniques that forged a mana core, rather than a mana heart, but that wasn't all. It was even different from other techniques that forged a mana heart. I knew that mana hearts weren't unique to my specific technique, but I hadn't expected them to differ by so much when they started the same way. The next step for me was to forge my first star, like the name implied. Like the circles Abigail and the other mages would create for themselves, my technique described forging stars around my mana heart. My first thought after reading about it was to imagine it like a solar system, but that picture didn't really match. I was creating a sequence of stars around my heart, not planets. The stars were born from the mana and essence I took in and acted similarly to my heart, but different. My heart meshed my physical might with my magical and used that to produce and store mana. My heartbeat itself worked as a force to regenerate my mana, and it also worked to act as a mana pool along with my blood. The stars I would forge increased that effect, but they also acted like miniature hearts themselves. They were like fusion reactors that helped provide energy to my heart in the form of mana. Did I really just compare stars to fusion reactors and not the other way around? God, I feel dumb. Anyway, with that being the case, the book Abigail had that listed the certain stat points needed to take the next steps didn't apply exactly. Especially not 1-to-1. A certain amount of wisdom was still required, but it wasn't as stringent as the 1,000, 3,000, 10,000 that her book stated. Along with wisdom, it required a certain degree of physical stats along with exceedingly stringent external aids in the form of mana and essence. Forging my first star would take far more than just traveling north for a few months. It would require me to find a source of frost essence, which was easier said than done. It was why I had chosen the bones I had for my evolution, but those wouldn't help me until after I evolved, not before. But I digress. If it was just the frost essence I was missing, I would have just purchased it from either the merchants or the reward store, but that wasn't the case. It was the area I needed more than the essence itself. Well, technically I needed both, but I wasn't going to get one without the other. Anywhere that had frost essence had the quantity and quality of mana I also needed. They came hand in hand. Essence produced mana, and anywhere that had essence there was a deluge of mana of the same aspect. I didn't have the funds to buy both the amount of frost essence I needed and all the mana I would need. With losses and inefficiencies, it just wasn't feasible. Not if I wanted to spend money on anything else. Plus, it was a waste if I could just venture north to find all that I needed without wasting to opportunity to get things that we wouldn't be able to find, no matter how hard we looked. Fuck it, I'll just keep saving them. I knew I would probably end up putting them into vitality or wisdom, but I couldn't decide right now. I had other things on my mind besides where to spend my free points, like getting home. We left the twins near the end of November, and it usually took around 2 months to get to Frostheim from there, but I was trying to do it in one. We were rushing through the snow at an untenable pace, traveling through the night when we could. We didn't need to, and there wasn't an emergency we had to get back for, but I was just fed up with traveling. The closer we got to Frostheim, the greater the urge became to just sprint off ahead of everyone. I couldn't have done it before because my powers were needed to keep the memorials frozen, but that wasn't the case anymore. It was cold enough now that they wouldn't melt, but I still couldn't bring myself to do it. I come this far, I might as well finish it out. I also couldn't leave the treasures. We were far from any other settlement, but I still had itchy fingers. We were carrying a tremendous amount of wealth, and no matter how many times I told myself that no one would attack us, I still couldn't help looking over my shoulder. Traveling with Marcus made it easier to put those worries to bed. We were over 1,000 strong traveling north. Now that he wasn't with us, we were a few hundred. It didn't feel nearly as safe. Even people inside the caravan were beginning to get antsy, looking at others suspiciously. It was like everyone had turned into a potential thief in their eyes, even though we hadn't had any problems with that. There were a few, as there always would be, but by and large, theft wasn't a big problem we had to worry about. People still kept an eye out anyway. They would be remiss not to with their newfound wealth at hand. The urge to get home, the growing anxiousness, and the phantom worry that we might be attacked had everyone on board to push through the night. It had been months and everyone had been seen to buy the healers. Every limb hadn't been regrown yet, but no one was on death's door or struggling. That being the case, and with everyone being high in ear rank, sleep wasn't necessary every night. The horses and bison weren't pleased with the arrangement, but they were more than powerful enough to weather what we asked of them. My goal was to be home by the solstice. It was aggressive, and there would be plenty of nights we skipped sleep, but I wanted to be home. Everyone else did as well. Maybe getting home will allow me to decompress. Chapter 306, hit me with it. Chris POV. Come on, come on, come on. Austin pleaded like a petulant child. Just one more time. I sighed heavily. Austin, I already know where we are and exactly how close we are. I pointed to a grouping of trees that had marks on them. We're only a few miles away. Austin followed my finger and his face scrunched up at seeing the markings. You don't know that those are ours. They could be made by beasts. I gave him a deadpan look without responding to that idiotic suggestion. Fine, but just one more time for fun. He changed gears. All right, I huffed. It was easier to placate him sometimes than it was to argue with him. Surprisingly, I had the same policy with little Anna. Those two were more alike than they realized. This wasn't the first time Austin asked for a boost, nor would it be the last. We'd done it a few times already, and both of us knew the drill by now. After agreeing, Austin went loping off into the woods and stopped a good distance away while I readied myself. I'm not using fury this time, I yelled. He'd managed to convince me that, for science, using my boosting skill was necessary. In reality, he just wanted to go a little higher. Austin didn't argue and instead started running at me. It wasn't his top speed, but it was still a decent clip. If he went too fast, I wouldn't be able to launch him at the right time. I was already bent down slightly and had my hands cupped in front of me, ready to receive him. His foot hit the mark, and I saw and felt him tense. As his leg extended to leap off my hands, I lifted with all my strength and sent him soaring into the air. What used to be a fun trick in our grandfather's pool turned into a way to launch him skyward. His own strength combined with mine let him reach truly ridiculous heights. His figure flashed with a bright light, and 2 wings flashed into being on his back. After his evolution, they were more substantial than before, looking nearly entirely lifelike, getting a boost from furthering his rank. He'd also spent a great deal of time purifying and strengthening his bloodline, which also made his wings have more substance. When he first evolved back to ear rank, they were mostly hollow and there for decoration. That wasn't the case anymore. A few people watched the man launch himself into the air with my help, but most had grown used to it by now. This wasn't the first time he'd done it, nor was it the first couple. He was scouting, if anyone asked, and said that getting the lay of the land is important. I knew he was mainly doing it because he found gliding back down fun, not because it was a good scouting tactic. I had to admit that it was, though. The height and his bloodline allowed him to see a lot further than what he could on land. He was also the one to finally alert us that Frostheim was in sight. We'd known we were getting close as the surroundings had become familiar, but he was the first to see home in the distance. After reaching the apex of his assisted jump, Austin flattened out and started gliding off toward the city. I doubted we'd see him again as he flew much faster than our caravan. His wings didn't flap as he wasn't strong enough yet to fly, but they were more than enough to see him glide off into the distance. It wasn't that much longer until we could see the walls ourselves. A wave of relief flushed through everyone now that we were finally back. Some of that relief was for being home, while some was because of the hard pace I'd put everyone through. The horses and bison would need some love, but I'd have Sarah tend to them. They'd be in for a few days of rest before anything more was asked of them. They deserved it. I finally felt some of my frustration ease when the gates finally came into view, but not as much as I expected. There was still much to do. The memorial service still needed to be planned, and those still wounded needed, take a breath. I sincerely hoped Abigail was on top of things as she usually was. It was just so depressing going around to make sure all of the ice was still in good shape. I used to have to perform the task every day and fill them with mana so the ice didn't melt, but now that it was winter, it was only required once every few days. I was mostly checking for cracks or blemishes, where the ice grew instead of melted, but it needed to be done nonetheless. On every 345 of them, 315 were killed during the battle, and a further 30 succumbed to their wounds or infection. All of them were in need of a send-off, and even though it was the last thing I wanted to do as I finally arrived, I also couldn't keep tending to them. It always made me angry. Crowds quickly formed after we had been spotted, and it felt like everyone in the city was out to greet us. It reminded me of the time we returned from the demons. There were tears of joy, tears of sadness. Families embraced while others stood over chunks of ice. I didn't want to be a part of it and made my exit only after saying a few words. Praise mostly, as that was all I could give them now. I also reminded everyone to choose how we would send them off. A few had written down their preferences, but there were still some that had to have their next of kin decide. Fools thought that their death wasn't in the cards, and now they would have to settle for whatever their family picked. My family was waiting as we passed through the inner wall, and the reception was much the same as the outer one, if only smaller. Sam was devastated as she stood over what was left of Alice, and so were the rest of the family. Sam lost another child, and it was already rare to see her smile. Ashley had grieved for her sister during the trip back, but seeing her mother like that, she broke down yet again. Mitchell lost both a wife and a sister, and he'd long run dry of tears. Even Vincent, with his usual quiet presence, shed a few at seeing Alice's body. I stood in silence and watched. The next few days felt both quick and slow at the same time. We took the first day to rest and give those who needed it time. Then, when the sun rose on the day following our return, we met atop the hill. Words were said and stories were told as two more were lowered into the ground. Alice was placed next to her father and brother, while Allison was placed next to where Mitchell would eventually go. Having to plan out where people were placed was not something fun. After we were finished, or as finished as we could be, I moved on to the others. There were still 345 to go, and I needed to be a part of everyone. They had fought for me, and not sending them off personally was wrong. Pyres were set for those who wanted to be sent off through fire. Graves were dug for those who wished for burial. Even small rafts were made for those wanting to go in the Viking way. For some reason, that was growing in popularity since the first time we did this after the demons. Ha! I laughed at myself depreciatively. How far have we fallen that I noticed the rising popularity of specific funerals. The services took the entire day, and some were even done during the night. Delaying until the next day felt wrong, and I was going non-stop from one place to the next. It wasn't until the third day after our return that the opportunity to catch up was available, but I put it off. Work was the last thing I wanted to do, and no one could make me. Abigail tried to get me caught up with everything that happened, talking about the merchants opening for business, the things she'd bought from them, and the state of our treasury, but I wanted none of it. I just wanted to be alone. Even going into my forge, where it was coldest inside the castle, didn't deter the woman. It wasn't until I fed my spirit fire so full of mana that frost started to build on the papers she was holding that she got the picture. Her body would have started freezing if she hadn't been using her own mana to ward off the cold. I had moved my bed of ice into my forge, and it was upon it that I tried to rest. Winter, my spirit fire, and the bed of ice were all not enough as I couldn't bring myself to finally rest. It was frustrating. I kept seeing scenes I didn't want to, people who lie bleeding out, faces screwed up in pain that would stay that way. I'd distracted myself with travel and books, but the time had come. It was destined to eventually, no matter how much I tried to push the feelings away. And boy, did I try. I wished my father were here. He'd know what to say to pull me out of this funk. But he wasn't. A third day passed before I pulled myself together. My sleep was fitful, but it would have to do. I couldn't keep putting everything off forever. Sophia! I called through the closed door loudly. I heard her jump from across the hall and rush through her office to my door. My perception wasn't the best, but I heard her chair fall over, her door slam open, and her feet rush across the hall. Not even a few seconds after my call, the woman was standing at the door waiting for my orders. She was bundled up in thick layers of fur from head to toe, but she never complained about the cold. "Can you grab Abigail for me?" "I'm ready," I said while getting up. There was a stack of papers on my desk that I could use to get a base view of everything before Abigail arrived to lay things out for me. Sophia nodded wordlessly and ran off throughout the castle. I lost track of her through my aura after she exited the front door. My aura was the only reason I knew she was there to begin with. The papers detailed all that had happened while we were gone for several months, and I dove into them while I waited. We initially left in April to make it there in time for the test, and only just returned at the end of December. 8 months was a long time to be away, and a lot had happened. Most of the papers were written in Sam's blocky handwriting. She was one of the few people I knew who used all caps when handwriting things. The newer papers were written in Abigail's hand. The harvest was detailed down to the fraction of a bushel. Yield per acre, time of harvest, and skills used on each crop. It was remarkably detailed. The time from planting to harvesting was most important. With how short the last frost of the year to the first frost of the next one was, there were a few crops that hadn't been harvested in time. I didn't wish to know how much wheat every farmer we had at our disposal grew personally, but what all of them managed to grow together. The current capacity of our granaries was another that I had to scan through to check. Everything was looking good, better than good. With the experience of having done it twice already, our yields were improving. We had more than enough to last us through the winter with enough extra to begin booze production. The first few Alish would be terrible, but I was more than ready to have beer production up and started. It had been too long since you could sit down and enjoy a nice cold brewski. A knock alerted me to Abigail's arrival, and I knew I would soon be getting a much more detailed briefing. She looked slightly haggard from all the work she'd had to catch up on. "Well, hit me with it," I opened the floor to her and settled in. I knew this would take a while. Chapter 307 Update on the Town. Chris POV. Sam did a wonderful job, by the way, Abigail started. The fields were tended to and the harvest was in good order. We exceeded our expected yield, and it was all stored properly before the first frost came. While we were gone, our population broke 20,000 as well, which has put a strain on the land we have available. With the wall limiting growth, we need to think about either going up or down. The increased strength of materials allows us to go up rather easily, but not endlessly. With the builders we have now and what we have available to us, I wouldn't want anything over 4 or 5 stories. Any higher and they'll stick out over the wall and start blocking line of sight from the castle. We had siege weapons to think about as well that she forgot to mention. Trebuchets lined the outer wall and the inner wall. If we made skyscrapers in between the two, the weapons on the castle and inner wall wouldn't be able to shoot over them. There was the arc we could work with, but losing line of sight would make everything harder. There was also the possibility of raising our walls higher, but that wasn't an effective solution. We'd run into the same problem eventually. It would just be kicking the can down the road. And do we have expansion plans? I asked, already knowing the answer. It also wasn't something I'd expected us to need so soon. I never imagined so many people living under my care. Yes, we do, Abigail said. We have a few we can pursue. The main one I want to start working on is utilizing the space under us. The cliff essentially cuts us off from a great deal of land. If we can make lifts or elevators that can facilitate travel up and down the cliff face, we can start moving in on the land down there. You've mentioned that before, and we are... I stopped midway through my sentence. What I was about to say was that we had no viable way to do so. Sure, we could use manpower and pulleys, but that wasn't a great solution. We were still working out generators and mundane electricity like we used to have, so any solution that required having it was stalled. That wasn't the case anymore. Miles had been working on communication as his main project, but that wasn't necessary anymore. We could switch him over to getting electricity back up and running. That would help a lot of things. Most of the magic technology one bartered with the Admiral for required it, too. Plus, with all the new enchanting books we now had, there had to be a magical solution for elevators somewhere in there. I hadn't known the runes before, but I could probably buy them now if I didn't already have them. I'll look into it, I said instead. It would be a good way to gain some profession levels as well. It was outside my comfort zone and would require me to learn a lot of things I didn't already know. I was already thinking about the new weight reduction rune we bought. We planned to use it on wagons and backpacks and such, but it could just as easily be used on a lift platform. Good, she nodded, pleased. We've also looked into moving the wall out, but with how much effort went into building the first one, that will be our last resort. Only after everything else is done will we do that. I nodded along. With your arrival, all of the treasures are now stored away and ready for use. We need to come up with a way to organize how they are utilized. The Order members are already pestering Hal and Elliot about when they will be able to gain access to the techniques and skill orbs. She carried on. The skill orbs were generic common skills, so I was surprised so many people wanted access to them. They were what we called the blade, strike, shot skills. Piercing strike had other variations like piercing blade and piercing shot that went with the blade and bow, respectively. Extended strike, sundering strike, penetrating strike, quick strike, and power strike were all the same and had their blade and shot counterparts. We didn't have enough points for all of them in all 3 variations, but we had enough to get all 3 of 2 skills. Piercing and power seemed the most versatile and were the 2 skills we chose. We also chose 2 for mages, Mana Bolt and Mana Shield, 2 generic skills that would help any mage start off. I already had Power Strike, which turned into Meteor Blow, and grabbed Piercing Strike after we got the skill orb. Their uses weren't unlimited, so we needed to come up with who got to use them. They recharged, but it wasn't instantaneous. Have Hal and Elliot bring me a list of who doesn't have either one. Those with one or the other can wait until everyone at least has one. We can prioritize the list later, I said. I wasn't sure how we would do it, but I was okay with deferring that until the list was made. Also, we should set a few aside for the young. It'll make the biggest difference to them. I agree, but that opens up a whole other discussion we can discuss later. In the meantime, Hal and Elliot mentioned holding a tournament as the way to decide. Abigail threw out there. I groaned. It wasn't a terrible idea, but it was so gladiatorish. Fighting for others' amusement was not something I wanted to incentivize. Felt wrong to do so. A battle was supposed to be to the death in most cases and was not sacred but close to it. Fighting for a crowd didn't sit right with me. If we do, it will be a closed tournament. Only the Order can watch, and that's only because it's a good teaching opportunity. I said, "All right." Abigail nodded and scribbled something down. Next, we need to decide how open we are going to be with the techniques we bought, both the body and the mana. Are we going to let everyone have access, just the Order, restrict some but not all? Damn. What's wrong with how we treat them now? The Order gets free reign while everyone else can pay for the privilege. The main incentive of joining the Order was access to our techniques. We kept them restricted to just the Order for a while, but eventually caved and allowed people to rent them for a fee. We didn't allow all to be rented out, but just the more general ones that would be easy to find elsewhere. The rarer and more powerful we kept for ourselves. We were quickly learning that all techniques weren't made the same. We had assumed at first that they were all generally equal, but that wasn't true. One body refining technique could be quantifiably better than another. The ones we purchased through the system stores were of a better quality than what we made ourselves or could get through merchants. Mana was even worse. Body refining had a set limit at every stage that all of the techniques had to adhere to, but mana didn't have that. One was 2 or sometimes even 3 times better than others. Nothing's wrong with how we do it now. We were just wondering if it should stay that way, or if we should switch it up now that we have more options. She said, "I see nothing wrong with how we do it now. If they give their oath and join the Order, they should have access to everything." I said firmly. Abigail noticed I was unlikely to budge on this issue and moved on. "All right, I've had some scouts and mages out looking for a good spot for the glacier seed, but they haven't come back with anything promising. There are a few spots that they deemed adequate, but none that are great. I'll have Austin take a look around before he gets antsy to leave again." I said, "If that doesn't work, I'll look myself. I've also sent people to collect our spoils and drop off what we owe to Mountainside, Yellowstone, and the rest you made deals with as well. The only thing that we still need input on is the road you promised to build," she said. "With the expansion taking up most of our builders, we don't really have the manpower to spend on a road. Offer a few Earth mages some better techniques, and if that doesn't work, tell them they can request a certain bloodline from me that can be found in the area. If it's possible, I'll go get it." I said. There was a list Jayla had given me of beasts near them that were decent choices. "Have them pave the way to the twins first." I added quickly, "Then we can work towards Mountainside. We would also eventually add a fork towards Yellowstone as well, but that could be saved for later." Abigail wrote down a few other notes before speaking again. "In our absence, the dungeons have grown. The Eastern Metal Dungeon now has 11 floors while the Northern Dungeon has 10. We need to decide on who we're going to make into a curator as well." "Fuck, Abigail. I don't care who it is." I said. "I thought Gabriel would jump at it, but he turned me down. Is there anyone else who wants it?" I had assumed my brother would love to turn into a curator, but he liked enchanting too much to make the switch. His refusal threw a wrench into my plans. "I think it's something Josh would like, but he won't be of age for another 5 years," Abigail said offhandedly. I had to admit, little Josh and his rocks seemed like the perfect person to be in charge of a dungeon, but we couldn't wait that long. "I'll ask around, but I don't think you'll get anyone. The only people who want to switch is Rachel, and she doesn't want to be a curator. With something as important as our dungeon curator, we hoped to keep it within the family, but no one wanted to make the switch. It was unfortunate, but I wasn't going to force anyone. Extend the search into the orders. See if any of them want to take up the mantle." I answered, "We need to set a price on the new profession starters we picked up and decide if and how we're going to incentivize them. Artificer, Magi-Tech Engineer, Golem Smith, Beast Tamer, Beast Handler, Breeder, and Beast Commander are all things that we could make use of." She listed off all the new professions we had access to. Do we have the funds to pay everyone who joins our employ? I questioned. That was how we usually did it. We gave access to the profession and, in turn, asked them to work for us. The professions we were in desperate need of, we gave in advance to incentivize people to choose them. We have more than enough. She responded with a smile. Our dungeon tax took a hit while we were away, but it was still half of what it used to be. Our regular tax also brought in a lot of funds, not to mention the equipment we've been selling. Vincent alone brings in a decent chunk of our finances. There was also the money we'd brought back with us. We spent a hell of a lot on food and supplies while we were away, but we also sold a lot of things to make up for it. Our main money sink right now was the alien merchants. Nothing they were selling was cheap, and they offered a lot we didn't already have. Our revenue would rise in the next few days with everyone back, so I wasn't that worried, but I hadn't taken a deep look into them yet. We can come up with those numbers later, but I'm okay with offering them out. I said, we'll make a lot of the money we give away back when people buy the techniques and knowledge we have. Abigail smirked. And the taxes we get from the merchants. We've already pulled in a decent amount from them. Everyone's spending their savings through them after they opened up shop. That was good. Try to impress on people to choose the beast-type professions. Then, we'll still need the magic tech and artificers, but I'd rather have the breeders working to open up trade. Faster horses with a wind affinity will move goods a lot faster. Plus, if we can find and tame a flyer, we can really get things going. Gabriel would argue that artificers remaking cars would work just as well, if not better than carriages pulled by horses. Abigail pointed out. It was an ongoing discussion between the two of us about which was better. I liked the beasts as they were cheaper to upkeep and took less infrastructure to be effective, but he liked the Magi-Tech option, saying it would be better in the long run. I sighed. Fine, leave it alone then. We'll see which gets more people. She smirked at my response. There are a few other things that don't need your input, but you should be aware of. We've purchased a few winter crops that should expand our food stores. Other than winter wheat, there are a few other grains we can now plant. The merchants said they're similar to our oats and rye. Also, they've expressed a version of grapes and berries that do well in our environment. They also mentioned it's popular to make wines out of them. There were also a few messages for you that I took care of. Ryan Claremont sent over the formation you asked for, Patrick Stafford sent a few feelers to us about an alliance with his faction, and Rachel opened up talks with the Eternal Flame faction about a potential sharing of knowledge. Lastly, a friend of Elliot wished to speak with you about something, but he wouldn't say what it was. Well, it looked like my plate was going to be full for the next few days. Also, Abigail added after I thought she was finished. Annabeth wishes that you could spend some time training her. Jonathan and I have agreed that she's old enough now and she wants you. Wait, what? I sputtered, caught off guard at the request. What about you or Jonathan? You're her parents after all. Abigail just gave me an odd look that I didn't quite understand. Sometimes, I forget how stupid you can be. Chapter 308 Annabeth. Annabeth POV. Anna was doing something that she wasn't supposed to. Her mom always lectured her on it whenever she was caught. But she couldn't help herself this time. It was too important. Sneaking around is bad. Eavesdropping is wrong. But they were talking about her. That should be permission enough to listen in, right? Well, it was a skill she'd gotten good use out of in the castle, and her dad always told her she was as quiet as a mouse. Anna had never intended to get so good at it, but when there was nothing else to do but sneak around, it was hard not to get better at it. Getting caught and scolded sucked, so she had to be good. Her legs cramped while her mom and Uncle Topher talked about stupid stuff, and it wasn't until near the end of the conversation that it became important. Who cared about the rest of it when they finally brought her up? Wait, what? What about you or Jonathan? You're her parents after all. The sound was muffled as it traveled through the heavy door, but she could still make out Chris's voice. Her mother's was a lot more recognizable. Sometimes, I forget how stupid you can be. What's that supposed to mean? I'm just saying that if she needs someone to train her, Jonathan is the obvious choice. He's trained many and kept them safe with his defensive skills, and he did a great job with Sarah. Why does she want me? I don't know how to train someone, Chris said, exasperated. Her mom sighed. You won't be her sole trainer, Chris. There'll be a number of us showing her all the different classes. Gabriel, Rachel, and I will teach her what mages do and how they fight. Ashley and Sam will introduce healers. Hal and Carrie for rangers. Mitchell and, well, just Mitchell for rogue. And you, Austin, and Jonathan will teach warrior. That's a lot of people just for little Anna. Does she even know which one she wants? Or are you trying to get her familiar with all of them before she decides? She's still young, and her choice is still 3 years away. I want to make sure she knows what she's picking. Her mom's voice was tight, and Anna nearly scoffed. She'd told her mom which one she wanted already. She wanted to be a warrior, like Dad and Uncle Topher. Maybe, if she were good enough, she'd be a mage too, like her mom. Like the Valkyries from the stories. They were awesome. Anna remembered Uncle Topher saying that hybridizing was bad. He said, being useful at one is always better than being useless at both. That makes sense. Chris sighed. I can free up some time then. How often is she to train with me? She still has school, but for most of the day she's free. I'm thinking we rotate through the classes so you'd see her every 5th day. I'll try to get Austin to stay for longer, but you know him. Eventually, it'll just be you and John teaching her. All right then. Every 5th day doesn't sound too bad. Especially if the time's split 3 ways. Chris said, does she know what profession she wants? She won't only be choosing a class. That, I'm not sure of. Every other day's something different. Her mom said, that wasn't true either. Sure, she may have changed her mind a few times, but not nearly as much as her mom said. What about Josh, then? Will he be joining in? Chris asked. He better not be. I had to wait until I was 11, and he just turned 9. Not yet. He's still too young. Her mom said thankfully. You know, at some point, training someone at that age will be the norm, Chris commented. Her mom sighed deeply. I know, but I want them to stay kids for just a little longer. If I could, I'd wait until they were 16 or maybe even 18, but I don't think Anna will wait that long. She'll find a way with or without me. The conversation had turned back into boring topics, and Anna could feel that it was coming to a close. She had to get away before they found out that she'd been listening in. She controlled her feet so as not to make a sound on the stone and quickly made her way back to her room. Staying quiet was difficult as she was vibrating in excitement. She was finally allowed to train. She couldn't wait. Chris POV. Abigail finally turned to leave, but stopped. Oh, before I forget. She took off a small bag at her waist and laid it on my desk. John worked his skills, but they were still rather expensive. I appended the bag and saw skill shards tumble out. I'd seen a few from the dungeons already, but not this many all at once. Charge. Wind manipulation. Hammer mastery. Taunt. Wind blade. There were 6 new skills for me to absorb. After using the skill orb 4 piercing strike, it would make 7 new ones. They were all common, but hopefully they wouldn't stay that way. There were a few more I wished to add, but I couldn't afford it. I was already scraping the bottom of the barrel to come up with the funds for those 6. There are usually a few dozen silver per skill, but to get them here it was more like a couple of gold per. Asinine prices, but there's nothing else we can do, she informed, until our own dungeons started producing more, or more like people started selling them instead of keeping them. We were forced to buy from the merchants. After the people gathering them were saturated, they would start trickling to the open market. The total gold we spent was all I personally had. I didn't dip into the city's funds, as those were already earmarked for projects Abigail needed money for. Plus, it wasn't my funds. Sure, I was the leader, but it was a waste to blow our budget on a few common skills for me personally. Earning just a single gold was not as easy as it sounded. Our city pulled in roughly $1.50 every month in taxes. Now that the city funded itself, I could keep all my earnings from the dungeons, but that wasn't as much as it sounded. Each run was only a few silvers a day. It took a while for it to add up to a gold. I usually let Vincent keep most of the money from the equipment I enchanted, as he used it to buy more materials. The rest of my income was technically the city's. The crystals weren't mine personally. plus paying the miners and buying the materials required to first build the mine cut into most of the first profits. Bah, I don't want to get into it right now. Balancing the red and black wasn't as fun as smashing some monsters around. I had started my daily dungeon dives back up, and now that there were a few more floors, it would be even more profitable. Then I could spend it with the merchants again. I wouldn't even have to check with anyone on how to spend my own money. Most of my time would be crafting, though. A lot of it. I had 11 levels to go, and I wanted to pick them up quickly. I'll be in my forge unless I'm needed, I said before Abigail left. Let me know when the next person is ready to evolve. How far away are you? I'm close, but I'm waiting until I forge my first circle. I thought about waiting for my anchor, but I don't feel close to it at all. Even with John helping, it's still slow going, she said. How is he, by the way? I asked. Jonathan had been in rougher shape than me after the fight. A first for us. Usually it was me. Still recovering. Injuries to the spirit take time to heal, and we don't have any healers that can heal the spirit, she said sadly. I knew something felt off with him after the battle, but it wasn't until he awoke and felt it out that we realized what it was. He tore his spirit. None of us knew that was even possible, but he somehow did it. Abigail spent her personal points to gain information about it, and we learned that if you draw too deeply from it and drain your spirit energy too much, it can cause your spirit to strain and tear. After hearing that, I realized that I'd come close to doing it a few times myself. After battles, when I awoke with my spirit aching and it was sluggish to regenerate, that meant I was close to tearing it and I had overstrained it. Jonathan went beyond even that, and literally couldn't use his spirit yet. If he did, it would only make it worse. He had to wait for it to heal completely before he could start using it again. It was also why he felt diminished to my senses. The power he usually had was leaking out of him. The good thing, though, was it wasn't permanent. He was healing and the tear was mending. As Abigail said, it was a slow process. Knowing that he tore his spirit, it made me question how the man was still alive. If he couldn't use it during the fight, how did the orcs not kill him? He had to have been low on mana and already injured. Gaining a wound such as that had to be debilitating. It reminded me of how sure Abigail was that her husband survived the fight, and after some inquiries, I found out why. Jonathan had fallen. After tearing his spirit, he was on his last legs when Abigail forced him underground. She'd literally buried him so that the orcs wouldn't kill him. It was also why he was so covered in mud and dirt when she brought him back. Good luck then. Let me know when you'll be leaving, I said. With that, my rundown on the situation was fulfilled, and I was ready to start working. I had a lot to do, and none of it would be quick. I needed to resummon my hammer, remake my armor, work on my skills, and so much more. But before all of that, I needed to absorb all the new books we bought, which wasn't going to be easy. I looked at the rough stack I had sequestered away and sighed. They were rather packed full of information and took a few read-throughs to get it all. Even then, I looked back every once in a while when something came up. Even though I really wanted to try out my new skills, I put it off. Annabeth POV. The next few days were torture. It was one of the biggest downsides to listening in when she wasn't supposed to. She couldn't mention anything about it or else her mom would know. Instead, she had to act oblivious and wait until her mom brought it up. It was awful. She almost slipped a few times, too. To speed things along, she'd been especially annoying asking about it, but even that didn't work. But the day finally came. She was to learn with the mages first, even though her mom knew she wanted to be a warrior. Her pleas were ignored. Instead of learning from just her mom, Uncle Gabe, and Aunt Rachel like she expected, her grandma and dad were there too. And so was Elliot. She didn't know him that well either, which made it weird that he was here. Grandma was a mage, so it wasn't surprising to see her, but the others weren't even mages. All right, Anna. Her mom started. We aren't sure this is going to work, but we're going to try something. Come stand here for a second. Anna did as her mom asked while everyone else stood in a circle around her. It made her nervous to be surrounded like this, especially with Elliot in the room, but she followed along. We're all going to release some mana in the air, and we want to see if you feel anything. Her mom said, It's okay if you don't, but we just want to try. Ha! Her mom was trying to play it cool, but she knew what this was about. Everyone here had a different affinity. Water and earth from her parents. Ice and fire from Uncle Gabe and Aunt Rachel. Wind from Grandma and metal from Elliot. Sensing mana was tough, but Anna had done it before. There wasn't a lot to do during their camping trip in the woods, so she usually spent it trying to glow. She'd seen Chris and Austin do it first and tried relentlessly to figure it out. It had been years since then, and she'd gotten better at it. It was still insanely difficult, but she could do it. As they started to release mana in the air, Anna shut her eyes and tried to focus. She scrunched her face up in concentration. First, she felt nothing, just like every other time mana was discussed. She'd felt it thicken before, sort of like going too deep underwater in a pool, but she'd only seen it a few times. She tried her best to do it now. She focused harder, and colors began to appear in her head. Her mom was a fountain of the purest blue. It was super pretty. Her dad was like the dark soil in the garden. She hated planting the garden as the dirt was sticky and smelled bad. Aunt Rachel was a mix of orange and yellow that looked exactly like a raging fire. Felt stuffy, like Uncle Vinny's forge. Grandma was gray, like the clouds when the sun didn't show. Elliot was also gray, but in a different way. His color felt heavier somehow, even though that didn't make sense. All of those were cool to look at, but only one was the prettiest. Uncle Gabe's was an icy blue that glimmered in her mind. It felt off somehow, like something was missing or it just wasn't quite right, but his was definitely the most beautiful. It reminded her of Uncle Topher. There were a few times she tried to sense mana with him near, and it was always easier. "Do you feel anything, sweetie?" her dad asked, breaking her concentration and making the colors go away. She was mad at first, but answered, "Uncle Gabe is the prettiest." She turned to Aunt Rachel. "You're too stuffy." Annabeth wasn't sure what was so funny, but they all broke out in laughter. "They better not be laughing at me." Chapter 309 Training. Annabeth POV. Training was fun. It was so much better than just sitting around and watching other people do it. That had been the hardest part about being told no or to wait. There was nothing she could do but sit by the wayside and watch as others grew or got better. She saw everyone else doing it, yet she couldn't. Well, couldn't in the eyes of her parents. They didn't know that she'd already started training long before they gave her permission. Sensing mana wasn't the only thing that she tried to do to get better. She still remembered the scary days before. Came in flashes, and she used to have nightmares about it, but they had gotten better with time. That didn't mean she didn't think about it anymore. They had put her in a guarded room and told them not to come out, but how was she not supposed to watch? Sometimes she wished she hadn't. Still, in order to get better and kill all the monsters like Uncle Topher, she needed to be strong. So strong nothing could touch her. That way, no one else would have to be buried. Finally getting the chance to actually train made her progress a lot better, especially with the help and guidance of others. A part of her felt like she'd wasted the time previously as her progress now was tens of times better than before, but she didn't like to think about the for long. Mage training was weird. It wasn't boring, but it also wasn't that fun. All three of her teachers focused on different things, and not all of them were exciting. Aunt Rachel had her focus on honing her mana sense and extending its range, which involved a lot of meditating and trying to see the colors again. Her mom worked on mana manipulation and education. It was mainly boring books in the library, as she couldn't really do anything with the colors yet. Sometimes Anna felt like they had moved, but it was hard to tell. Gabriel focused on spells. He'd show her cool ice magic and try to describe the spell matrix behind them. It didn't really make a lot of sense to Anna, but Uncle Gabriel's sessions were definitely the most exciting. The next day, she was with Mitchell. He was quiet most of the time and didn't really seem all that excited to be teaching her. It made his lessons not very fun. He hadn't been the same since he came back. Still, they focused on making her sneakier, and that was a good thing. It also involved a class on poisons, which always left her nose burning and a perpetual stink. They also let her and Aurora out in the woods to practice being sneaky. It was cold, but that was fine. Anna wasn't that excited about Cousin Mitchell's days. The next day was Sam and Ashley's. They would mostly be healing people and would try to describe to her what they were doing, but it was mainly them asking her about body parts. Who could remember all of them anyway? They could have named them in a way that didn't have them all sound similar. That was just making it hard for no reason. Tibia and fibula? Ulna and something else. Anna's day with the healers was better than with Mitchell, but they still weren't very fun. That was okay, though, because 2 bad days were made up with the next day. Hal let her train with his order. They had all the wolves, too, so Aurora could come. Aurora liked playing with the order's wolves. Some of them were her siblings, so it was fun watching them compete or roughhouse. Those days would also let her be with Sarah, which was also fun. Anna used to not like her, but she had matured. Well, it took a talking to by her dad to tone down what he said was jealousy. But still, she was the bigger woman. Hal taught her how to shoot a bow and how to hunt. She didn't like the messy bits, but Sarah made her do it. At first, Anna wasn't sure why Sarah would usually tag along, but she gave advice and helped Anna get through it. She only wanted to quit twice. Bows weren't that fun. And it wasn't because she wasn't that good with them. Then her favorite day came. A part of her believed that her mother made her wait for warrior training until last on purpose, but she couldn't prove it. Mom said it was so they could give Uncle Topher a break. But that sounded like a lie. Uncle Topher didn't need rest. She'd seen him fight for hours without getting tired. Warrior training started with her dad in the morning right after breakfast. He taught her how to use a shield and how to defend herself from attacks. The shield was heavy, and getting whacked with sticks wasn't very fun. He also made her exercise, which also wasn't that fun. She got through it by imagining how much stronger she would be when the day to pick her class finally came. She may, or may not, have been keeping a countdown on her wall in her room. Uncle Austin was up next, and he usually taught the spear. He would spar with her and point out openings to take advantage of and how to spot them. He used his mana to glow sometimes to help point out where to target. No matter how hard she stabbed him, she never did any damage. Then, finally, it was Uncle Topher's turn. Training with her dad was the first few hours of the day before school. She was with Austin after school, and Topher right before dinner, but he wasn't here. She was a bit upset that he was late, but sat down and waited for a few minutes. It wasn't long until he came jogging over to where she was sitting. The snow had been cleared, and the cold wasn't that bad here, so she was fine in her furs. Sorry about that. I got carried away. He wasn't wearing his fancy armor and didn't have his hammer, which was a bit of a letdown. How was he supposed to train her without it? Where were you? She did her best to sound upset. We were supposed to start 10 minutes ago. I was beating up on some bad monsters and didn't realize what time it was. He tousled her hair, and she swatted his hand away. She wasn't a kid anymore. You aren't wearing armor and don't have a weapon, though, she pointed out. Uncle Hal had taught her to be observant, and Austin said to evaluate your opponent critically. Uncle Topher also didn't have blood anywhere, which was a sign against him fighting monsters. He always came back bloody after that. You're underestimating your uncle, Anna. My body is a weapon. She knew it was from a movie, but she wasn't sure which one. Besides, my armor is broken. Broken? She asked. How did it break? She'd seen his armor and knew it looked tough. He even put runes on it. No armor is invincible. Eventually, it breaks and you have to make a new set, he said. Or you can grow out of it, but I haven't done that yet. Maybe one day when things stop being so shit. Ope, that's a bad word. Anna wanted to call out swear jar, but they didn't have it anymore. Anyway, why don't we sit for a second? I'm sure your dad trained you hard. Anna was a little tired, but she wasn't going to admit that. Okay, maybe she was a lot tired. You've been with the others all week, and I'm sure they've shown you a little of what all the classes are about. Do you have one you're leaning toward? He asked. Anna nodded vigorously. Yeah, I want to be a warrior. Like you. His face turned sad for a second. Have you really thought about it? I mean, deeply thought about it. Your first class does not define your future. It's the first step in what will hopefully be a long road. Each has their benefits, but don't tell them I said that. He smirked. Anna was confused. But isn't warrior the best? There is no objectively best for everyone. It is what's best for you. He poked her in the chest. One class can be perfect for one person and terrible for another. This first class choice isn't about finding which is best or most powerful. It's about finding which one you want to walk down. Picking warrior just because you think it's the best isn't a good enough reason. To be a warrior, you have to fight like a warrior. You have to want to be a warrior. You just don't pick up a sword and become one. He was speaking heavily. Heavy like the time Mom said Grandpa wasn't coming back. It's also a dangerous path. I'm sure your mom warned you against picking warrior. Anna nodded sadly. That's for a reason. In the 2 big battles we've fought, over half of the deaths have been warriors. Anna was sad. She wanted to be like him. I'm not trying to tell you not to, Topher said, and she cheered up a bit. I'm just saying not to close off any doors yet. You still have 3 years until you have to choose. Don't waste this time you have making this choice early. You know what Grandpa would say. An informed decision is better than a quick decision. She mumbled. Exactly right. And what do you think he would say if you didn't take this time to learn about all the different classes? He asked. He'd be upset with me, Anna mumbled again. Right? He said sharply. Now, I didn't mean to get you all mopey. How about we start training? Anna jumped up. Finally. What are we going to do first? Do I get to pick a weapon? Her training with Dad was shields and conditioning, and Austin made her use the spear. She hadn't gotten to choose the weapon she wanted to yet. Why is that your first thought? Chris laughed. The weapon isn't important. We'll give all of them a try in the time you've got left. Being a warrior isn't restricted by what shape of metal you swing around. Anna wanted to say, but you swing ice, but decided not to. Then what are we going to do? Anna asked curiously. Uncle Topher had a small smile. The first lesson about being a warrior is that pain is inevitable. It took me a long time to learn not to flinch from pain, and since we're going to have to go slow, we'll have to start now. Anna suddenly wasn't looking forward to training with her uncle. Anna was hurting, tired, exhausted, wiped out, and every other word she could think of that meant tired. Every time she fell, Uncle Topher expected her to get up. He didn't ask, didn't yell or scream, just stood and waited in expectation. Somehow that was worse. She didn't want to let him down. It wasn't until dinner time that he finished, finally letting her collapse to the cold ground. She'd gotten too hot for the furs she'd been wearing and had to take them off midway through. Now we can't have you dying of hypothermia. Your mother would kill me. Thankfully, she was scooped up and carried inside toward the food. She was super hungry, too. She must have fallen asleep, as she didn't remember being placed in her bed. The furs were warm, and she sighed into the soft bedding. Her body still hurt, but it was better now that she was in bed. Anna heard yelling through the wall. She didn't even need to press her ear against the door to hear the words clearly, as they carried through the heavy wood easily. What were you thinking, Chris? I had to use a healing spell on her. It was her mom and she was angry. You told me to train her, and that is what I did. Uncle Topher was also loud, but not yelling. Close but different. His words were angry too. Anna had never heard him like this. He was usually never angry. She's a child. Her mom yelled, You can't push her this hard. If I don't, where do you think she will end up? Oh, he was really angry now. A pressure started to push on her. I trained the order as best I could, and look how that ended. Half of them died. This is different. If you can't tell the difference, maybe we should just stick with Austin and John. Her mom said, No. Anna yelled in her head. There was a soft sigh and then the pressure went away, and he wasn't yelling anymore. I'm sorry. I'll tone it down next time. If you need me, I'll be in the forge. Anna heard a door open and close, and her mom sighed. Chapter 310 Samuel's Request. Chris POV. I had to admit that I may have handled things poorly. It was hard to train Annabeth without remembering the faces. Those of the order. Men and women, while I didn't spend too much time with, spent a decent amount getting to know them and training them. The memories of what came next and seeing them repeat made me feel hollow. The memory of my ice forming around their already cold bodies. Doing the same things all over again wasn't fun. Having a yelling match with my sister over it also wasn't the best highlight either. It was Anna's first day and I had treated it like Navy SEAL boot camp. I wanted her to fail, wanted her to ring the bell, which wasn't the right way to go about training an 11-year-old. Hell, I was surprised she kept getting back up. That took heart. After leaving Anna off and getting a talking to I deserved, I went off to my forge still slightly frustrated. My hammering was muffled, thankfully, and I worked throughout the night with muddled thoughts. I wasn't working on my armor, but on something else. Austin needed to be re-geared more than I did, but I wasn't even working on his replacement gear either. I wasn't sure when his urge to leave would flare up, and I wanted to make sure I had his new equipment ready before he left. Vincent, with his fire affinity being closer to Austin's solar, took care of the forging, but I still had to spend time drawing runes on it. I wasn't working on the piece now, as I still needed to practice. I wanted to use Tier 2 runes. One of the biggest worries I had was my profession falling behind, and using them was my idea to push things. Right now it was only at rare, and I hadn't done a whole lot to make me think that would change. I also wasn't sure how long I would wait at the cap to fix that if it turned out to be true. Austin, with his epic class and epic profession, received the same stat points as someone with a legendary class and rare profession. To keep my stat advantage and subsequently my power advantage, I needed to focus on both. Another reason I wasn't focusing on my own armor was because I didn't want to remake it again after evolving. If I made a new set now, as soon as I evolved into whatever new class 1 chose, I would possibly need to remake it again depending on the new profession skill I unlocked. I wanted to hone my skills and upgrade them as much as possible before making a new set as well. I also wanted to give the materials time so that mana infusion would get them accustomed to my mana and the cold. I hadn't realized I'd spent the entire night and the next day had started until Sophia came into the room, drawing my attention. "Sir, Samuel is here to see you," she said, all businesslike, a step inside the door. She didn't usually like coming in further as it was colder near the spirit fire and she was not as well liked by the cold. "Samuel? Who the fuck is Samuel? Who is that?" I asked, looking up from the metal piece in my hands. Sophia looked confused. "I was told that Abigail informed you of this meeting before. Did she?" I tried to remember back to what she'd said last week. I remember now. She said a friend of Elliot's wants to meet me but didn't tell me a name." "Samuel is Elliot's friend?" I asked, hoping that I was right, as if I wasn't. I was more clueless than I felt comfortable. Sophia nodded with a small amount of relief that I had recalled. I didn't realize that meeting was today. It was a touch annoying to be pulled away, but I was hopeful this meeting wouldn't last long. With Anna's training taken care of for the week, I had the rest of it to dedicate to the forge. Elliot and Samuel had originally come from the same town and joined us at the same time. Elliot had risen into an order captain while I wasn't sure what his friend was doing now. I knew he wasn't in the order as I would have known his name, and I also knew he wasn't a guard. I remember him volunteering for the demons though, so he's at least got that going for him. "All right, Sophia, lead me to him." I stood and placed the half-finished rune on the table. It was going to fail anyway, as I was still getting the hang of the higher rune and was far from being able to successfully engrave it. Sir, I think it's best if you change first," she said hesitantly. I looked down. It's best I do. I didn't work with a flame, so I didn't have soot covering me, but I also wasn't in the most presentable attire. Samuel POV. His hands, even in the frigid cold, were sweating nonstop. It felt like a river was flowing down his back as he walked through the snowy streets toward the castle. He was lucky there was magic now, as the sweat would have killed him in this kind of weather before, wicking his heat away with an errant breeze to be left to die of hypothermia. "There's no need to be nervous. Relax a little." His friend for nearly a lifetime tried to calm him down, but it didn't work. "That's easy for you to say, Elliot," Samuel retorted. "You're not the one marching to a room with him. I've seen what the man can do. No amount of reassurances is going to make me any less nervous. The knowledge that he could kill me in a snap of his fingers doesn't just go away." Samuel clearly remembered what the man he was about to meet was capable of. Elliot, the damn bastard, had convinced him to go fight the demons, and it was hard to miss their lord's achievements. "It'll be fine," he said. "They're demons, Sam," he said. "This is what's right, Sam. Eventually, He caved and saw himself marching off to battle otherworldly creatures. He'd been bedridden for 2 weeks after that fight, and it took months for his leg to be regrown. The next time his friend came and asked him to go south into the unknown to kill the unknown, for an unknown amount of time, he flatly refused. There was no way he was getting fooled twice. Nope, no shame on him happening this time. While it was hard letting his friend go off to battle alone, there was no way in hell he was going with him. He barely survived the first time, and Samuel was not close enough with Lady Luck to try his hand again. Best to leave that to the maniacs and the insane. He's not going to kill you, Elliot said and gave him a pat on the back. You're not worth it. Ah, gee, how helpful. Samuel grunted. I know that. You know that. Even Christopher knows that. But that doesn't change the fact it's possible, and there won't be a damn thing I can do about it. His mind replayed charging the demons. He wasn't as strong as Elliot and wasn't told to be a champion. Instead, he was just like the rest of the warriors and was told to hold the line. He charged in and immediately nearly died. He started to fend off one demon in the hopes he wouldn't be skewered. In the course of the battle, he killed just under a dozen. Most were the mindless hellhounds, as they were easy to bait into aggressively attacking. During the battle, he still remembered his charge being instantly stopped by the first rank of demons. Being behind the man during the charge, he saw the Lord, a lone man clad in ice, ram through rank after rank like it was a stroll in the park. The man killed more demons in one swing of the hammer than Samuel killed in the entire battle. And he was about to sit in a confined room, and talk to the man. With Elliot by his side, they cleared the inner wall easily, and he couldn't help but marvel at the castle. He'd helped construct it, but seeing the finished product still took his breath away. Not many got to come inside to see it that often. The halls looked entirely different now that they were furnished, and he could tell some changes had been made. It looked lived in, but not in a bad way. Homier than he expected the monstrosity of stone to be. One of the few people working in the castle directed him to a meeting room where he waited. Elliot was still by his side, but he was about to leave. Samuel had wanted to have his friend with him for the discussion, but Elliot had declined. It wasn't his fight, he'd said, leaving Samuel to go at it alone. Are you sure about this, Sam? Elliot looked not worried, as he didn't share Samuel's nervousness, but disappointed. Elliot had tried to get him to join the order many times, but each time Sam refused. That wasn't what he wanted. This was. I'm sure, he said firmly, even though his nerves were a wreck. He knew this was what he wanted. All right, good luck then. Remember, be upfront and honest, and everything will be fine. It wasn't the first time Elliot had given him the helpful tip, but he still nodded anyway. Being left alone only made things worse for his clammy hands. He tried to dry them off on his furs, but that didn't seem to work. The last thing he wanted to do was shake the man's hand with sweat dripping off him. Samuel cheated and used meditation. He was good enough to keep his awareness of the outside world while meditating, but it wasn't as deep. That didn't matter, as he was only using it to control his breathing and heartbeat. He didn't have to wait for long, thankfully, but he wasn't sure if that was good or bad. His fearless leader marched into the room like he owned the place, and to be fair, he did. Christopher had never oozed charisma like some people Samuel had met before, but there was a weight around him that was impossible to ignore. It functioned even better to keep eyes on him. Christopher looked a little tired, but Samuel wasn't going to say that. He wore what everyone else wore, but of much better quality than his own. He also knew that he didn't have to and would be just fine with nothing on at all. Samuel, I'm told you wanted to see me, he said. Thankfully, his hands had dried in the wait. Yes, sir. Samuel stumbled initially, but got his feet under him. Elliot also told him not to call him my lord, but he couldn't help but call him sir. There was no way he was not going to give deference to someone who could snap his neck with 2 fingers. Well, what about? Elliot kept tight-lipped when asked. He seemed curious as to why Samuel had sought him out, which boded well. Ahem, I don't know if you remember, but I joined your procession right before you stopped here and built Frostheim. I'm from a small town that you passed through. Samuel started. Yes, I remember. Well, sir, I was wondering, and a few others too, if it would be possible to rebuild our town? Not in the same spot, as that's days away, but a new area we could start over. Samuel rushed to get the words out quickly. Seeing how Christopher wasn't going to respond, he continued. Some are more accustomed to a slower lifestyle, one without so many people around. Now that the city's grown, it's also getting a bit crowded. Not to say that's a problem, just that some, like myself, want for a different life. Mainly, people missed having their own lawns and backyards, houses they could call their own, an independence that was impossible to find in the city. I see no problem with that, but I don't understand why you're coming to me about it, Christopher said, confused. If you need help purchasing a pylon, that can be arranged. Samuel was confused. What? Pylons are available now that we are a small city. If you wish to start your own settlement, you will need a pylon. Unless you want to go without, but then you won't have access to the market or other advantages. They're expensive, but I'm sure we could work something out. If you already have a group planned, the cost divided amongst you shouldn't be backbreaking, Christopher said. I think he thinks that I want to go off and start my own city outside of his territory. A Spirit city. An independent city. I was hoping to stay within the faction. You would still rule it, and will pay you taxes in food or coin. Samuel said, leaving, and I hope you'll protect us unsaid. Oh, a look of realization flashed. You want to create a village under me? Your pylon subordinate to mine? My laws and taxes. That means I'd have to protect you. It was clear that he was quickly catching on and working through all that entailed. How do you plan to face the settlement waves? While being a lower pylon level makes them easier, they still come regularly. Pylons of the same faction all receive their waves at the same time, so our help will be limited. Plus, it doesn't seem like a long-term solution to have to send people out to face them every month or so. If you wish to run a village, at the very least I ask you to be self-sufficient for day-to-day life. Also, defenses? It took a long time to build the wall and enchant it. Do you have someone who can ward it? Christopher ran on faster than Samuel could speak up. How high a pylon level do you wish to go? Outpost level is easy enough. Village gets harder, but it still won't require anything too extensive. Samuel seized the pause to speak. We are prepared to face the settlement waves alone. I and a few others went to face the demons and came out with a fair bit of strength. Nothing compared to you, though. We don't plan on going any higher than village for now, so that should keep the waves manageable with who we bring. They keep getting stronger, but we think that should be fine, Samuel said. Christopher nodded. It's good to see you have a plan, but that doesn't mean I've agreed to it. I still don't know how I feel about this. I only wanted to build one city to protect my family. A bastion, if you will. I never thought about villages or towns or anything else. Samuel gained some courage over the conversation so far and used that to point something out. Everyone cannot live in one city. There's only so much food to go around. He immediately regretted it. The hard stare froze him in place, and the sweat running back before was nothing compared to what was happening now. I guess you're right, but I will need to think this over. I'll have Elliot come get you after I've decided, he said, ending the meeting and standing up. Samuel didn't even remember shaking the man's hand goodbye or walking out. All he remembered was getting out of there as fast as possible.